My father-in-law offered me $50,000 to divorce his son. His wife doesn't know about his mistress. My father-in-law Richard asked me to meet him at his office last Tuesday. Said it was about estate planning, and that I shouldn't mention it to my husband Lucas since it was a surprise. I should have known something was wrong when he closed the door and opened his desk drawer, pulling out a check. $50,000, he said, sliding it across the mahogany desk. All you have to do is leave Lucas. I stared at the check, my name already written on it. Is this a joke? I'm completely serious. Take the money, file for divorce, and disappear. Why would you want me to leave your son? Richard leaned back in his leather chair. Lucas deserves better. Someone from our social class. Someone who understands our world. We've been married for 3 years. A mistake I'm trying to correct. You're a waitress from Newark. Lucas is heir to a fortune. This marriage is an embarrassment. Lucas loves me. Lucas is infatuated. There's a difference. Take the money, Anna. It's more than you'll see in 5 years of serving coffee. I stood to leave, but Richard wasn't done. Sit down. I'm not finished. I'm not listening to, if you don't take this deal, I'll make sure Lucas divorces you anyway, and you'll get nothing. You can't force him to divorce me. Richard smiled coldly. I can when he sees these. He pulled out a manila envelope spreading photos across his desk. They were of me, taken 2 weeks ago at a hotel. But I wasn't alone. I was with a man I'd never seen before. The photos showed us kissing, entering a room together, him undressing me. Except it never happened. These are fake. Technology is amazing, isn't it? But Lucas won't know that. Neither will the judge in your divorce proceedings. Lucas would never believe. Really? When you mysteriously have $50,000 in your account? When the hotel confirms you were there? When this man testifies about your affair? What man? I don't even know who that is. My associate. Very convincing actor. Already rehearsing his testimony about your 6-month affair. I was shaking. Why are you doing this? Because I've worked too hard building this empire to watch my son throw it away on trash. That's when the door opened. Richard's wife Catherine walked in with coffee. Oh, Anna. What a lovely surprise. Planning something special for Lucas's birthday? Richard's face went white. Catherine, we're in a meeting. Don't mind me. She set down the coffee, then noticed the photos. Oh my God. She picked up one of the fake photos, staring at it. Mom, those aren't real, I said quickly. Richard is... I know they're not real, Catherine said quietly, because I know exactly when and where these were taken. We both stared at her. She pulled out her phone, scrolled through it. Same hotel, same room, same angle. She showed us a photo. It was Richard with a woman who wasn't Catherine. Same positioning as my faked photos. You used your blackmail photographer for your affair? Catherine's voice was deadly calm. Richard stood. Catherine, this isn't... Shut up. She turned to me. He's been seeing his secretary for 2 years. I hired a PI 6 months ago. I have everything. The hotel records, the credit card statements, the jewelry purchases. Catherine, please. But what's interesting, she continued, is what else the PI found. Anna, did you know Richard has another family? My jaw dropped. Richard went pale. 23-year-old son in Boston. Been paying for his college, his apartment, his mother's house for 24 years. Lucas has a half-brother he's never met. You're lying, Richard said. Catherine pulled out more documents. DNA test. Bank records. The boy looks exactly like Lucas. She turned to me. I was waiting for the right moment to destroy him. This seems perfect. Richard grabbed the check from his desk. Fine. 100,000. 200,000. Name your price. For what? Catherine laughed. To keep quiet? To leave? Oh, Richard. I'm not going anywhere, and neither is Anna. She picked up the fake photos of me. We're keeping these as evidence of your blackmail attempt. The real photos of your affair are already with my lawyer. You can't prove... I can prove everything, including the company funds you've been embezzling to pay for your second family. Richard's phone rang. He looked at the caller ID and went even paler. Answer it, Catherine commanded. He did, on speaker. A woman's voice filled the room. Richard? It's Sandra. Your son's been in an accident. We're at Mass General. They need insurance information. Should I use your real name or the fake one you gave the hospital? Lucas chose that moment to walk in. Dad? Mom said you wanted to see... He saw the photos, the check, our faces. What's going on? Catherine smiled. Your father was just explaining why he has another son your age in Boston. Lucas looked at the phone where Sandra was still talking. Richard? Are you there? Tommy's asking for his dad. The room went silent except for Sandra's voice. Then she said something that changed everything. Also, the police are here. They want to know about the money. The FBI traced it. I couldn't move. Sandra's voice kept coming through the speaker, asking questions about insurance forms and whether Richard would come to the hospital, and every word felt like another bomb going off in the room. Lucas stood completely still near the door, his face blank in a way that scared me more than if he'd been crying or yelling. Catherine walked across the office like she owned it, which I guess in a way she did now, and pressed the button to end the call. She turned to Richard and her voice came out cold and sharp. Sit down. We're going to have a very long conversation right now. Richard's face went red and he stood up fast, knocking his chair back. Everyone needs to leave my office immediately. This is a private matter and I won't be interrogated in my own building. Catherine pulled something from her purse and held it up. A business card between two fingers. That's interesting because I have Special Agent Meredith Blackwell's direct number right here, and she told me to call the moment you tried to interfere with witnesses or obstruct the investigation. Should I dial? Richard's mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. Lucas finally moved, taking one step forward. How long? His voice sounded rough, like he'd been screaming even though he'd been silent this whole time. How long have you had another son? The pain in those words made my chest hurt. Richard started to answer, but Lucas cut him off. Don't lie. Just tell me how long. 24 years, Catherine answered when Richard stayed quiet. Your father met Sandra when you were just a baby. Tommy is only 6 months younger than you. Lucas grabbed the edge of Richard's desk like he needed it to stay standing. Catherine opened her bag and started pulling out papers, spreading them across the desk next to the fake photos of me. Wire transfers dating back 24 years. Monthly payments of $5,000, increasing to $8,000 in recent years. Richard met Sandra when she was a paralegal at Ammons and Fletcher, the firm he used for contract negotiations. She got pregnant and he set her up in Boston with a nice apartment and regular payments. She pulled out more documents. These payments came from company funds, not personal accounts. Richard created a fake consulting contract with a shell company he controlled, then funneled money through it to Sandra. Very sophisticated for the first decade, but then he got sloppy. Richard's face changed from red to white as Catherine kept talking. The FBI has been watching the company for 6 months. Suspicious transaction patterns triggered automatic reports to federal investigators. They brought in forensic accountants who traced nearly $2 million diverted to personal use. She looked at me. That $50,000 he offered you? That would have come from the same embezzled funds. He was going to use stolen money to bribe you into leaving. Lucas made a sound like all the air had been knocked out of him. He turned without saying anything and walked out of the office. I ran after him, my shoes loud on the marble floor of the hallway. I found him leaning against the wall near the elevators, bent over like he might throw up. Lucas. I put my hand on his arm and he grabbed me, pulling me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. His whole body shook against mine and I realized he was crying without making any sound, just these silent sobs that shook through him. I held on and didn't say anything because what could I say that would make any of this better? We stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes. Finally, he pulled back and wiped his face with his sleeve. We need to go somewhere private, anywhere but here. We drove to our apartment and Lucas didn't say a single word the whole way. I wanted to fill the silence, but I didn't know what to say. So I just kept my hand on his leg and felt him shaking under my palm. At home, he went straight to the couch and sat down, staring at nothing. I went to the kitchen and made tea even though neither of us would drink it, just because I needed something to do with my hands. When I brought the cups over and sat next to him, he finally spoke. Did you know about any of this? No, I only found out about the blackmail today when your father called me to his office. The fake photos, the money, all of it. I explained everything Richard had said and done, and I watched Lucas's face get harder with every word. He tried to pay you to leave me. Yes. With fake evidence of an affair. Yes. Because he thinks you're not good enough for our family. His voice broke on the last word. Lucas, none of this is your fault. He's my father. I should have seen something. Some sign that he was capable of this. How could you? He lied to everyone for 24 years. Your mother didn't know about the embezzlement and she's been married to him your whole life. Lucas put his head in his hands. I have a brother I've never met who's my age and looks like me and has been living in Boston this whole time. My father went to his birthday parties and school events and helped him with college applications, and I never knew any of it existed. My phone rang and I almost didn't answer it. But then I saw it was Catherine. Lucas took the phone from me when I told him who it was. Mom, we need time to process this. I could hear her voice through the speaker, fast and urgent. Lucas's face got tighter as he listened. Tomorrow? I don't think we can. More talking from Catherine. The FBI? Already? He looked at me and I saw fear in his eyes. Okay, yes, we'll get lawyers. He hung up and handed me back my phone. She says federal investigators will want to talk to everyone in the family. She's already hired a criminal defense attorney for herself, and she thinks we should do the same. She's filing for divorce and cooperating with the FBI in exchange for immunity. That night we lay in bed, but neither of us could sleep. The room felt too quiet and too loud at the same time, filled with all the things we weren't saying. In the dark, Lucas started talking. I thought my family was perfect. Growing up, my father seemed so strong and sure of everything. We had these family dinners every Sunday where he'd talk about business and principles and doing the right thing. He taught me about honor and responsibility and building something that would last. His voice got quieter. He made me feel like I had to live up to this impossible standard. Be perfect, make perfect choices, marry the perfect person from the perfect background. And the whole time it was all lies. Everything he taught me about honor and honesty was just words while he stole money and kept a secret family and tried to destroy my marriage with fake evidence. I held his hand in the dark and let him talk. Sometimes people just need to say things out loud to make sense of them, and I knew Lucas needed to work through this in his own way. "I'm sorry," he said after a while. "For my family, for my father, for everything you've been put through because you married me. You have nothing to apologize for. None of this is your fault. He called you trash. He tried to pay you to leave. He made fake photos to destroy you. And your mother stopped him. She's been building a case against him for months. She protected me when it mattered." Lucas was quiet for a long time. "I don't know who my father really is. I don't know if I ever did." Catherine called again in the morning, and this time Lucas agreed to meet her for lunch. He asked if I'd come with him, and I said yes without thinking about it. We met her at a small restaurant downtown, the kind of place where people go to have private conversations. Catherine looked exhausted despite her perfect makeup and expensive clothes. She sat down and started talking before we even ordered. "I'm filing for divorce today. My attorney is Evangeline Stewart, one of the best in the state. I'm cooperating fully with the FBI investigation in exchange for immunity from any charges related to Richard's financial crimes. You both need to hire criminal defense attorneys immediately, even though you're not targets of the investigation." "We're not criminals," Lucas said. "No, but you're family members of someone under federal investigation for embezzlement and fraud. The FBI will want to interview you about what you knew and when. Having an attorney present protects you." She pulled out a card and slid it across the table. "Ricardo Vega. He's excellent, and he's agreed to represent Anna pro bono as a favor to me. Lucas, my firm has someone they recommend for you." Lucas took the card and stared at it. This is really happening. "The FBI, criminal charges, divorce." "Yes, and it's going to get worse before it gets better." Catherine's voice was matter of fact, like she was discussing a business deal instead of her family falling apart. "Richard will fight the charges. His attorney Lawrence Hammond is already building a defense strategy. The media will find out soon if they haven't already. Your lives are about to become very public and very difficult. The FBI has been investigating Richard's company for 6 months," Catherine continued. "Suspicious transaction patterns triggered automatic reporting requirements. Banks have to report certain types of transfers, and Richard's shell company setup eventually caught their attention." She pulled out more documents from her bag, and I wondered how long she'd been carrying all this evidence around. "Forensic accountants have traced nearly $2 million diverted from company funds to personal accounts and Sandra's expenses over 24 years. Richard's embezzlement was sophisticated at first, but got sloppy as he grew more confident. He started using company credit cards for personal expenses, making larger transfers, keeping worse records." She looked at both of us. "The FBI agent I've been working with is named Meredith Blackwell. She'll want to interview you both to establish what you knew and when you knew it. Be completely honest with her. Any hint that you're covering for Richard will make you look complicit." Lucas hadn't touched his water or looked at the menu. "What about Tommy? The son in Boston. What do we know about him?" Catherine's expression changed slightly, got a little softer around the edges. "I've had a private investigator watching Sandra and Tommy for months. I know more about them than Richard probably does at this point." She pulled out her phone and showed us photos. "Tommy is 23, graduate student in engineering at MIT. Seems like a good kid from what my investigator could tell. No criminal record, good grades, normal social life. He had no idea Richard was married with another family until recently." Lucas stared at the photos for a long time. I looked too and felt my stomach drop because Tommy looked so much like Lucas. Same nose, same jaw, same way of standing. You could tell they were brothers just from looking at them. "Can I meet him?" Lucas asked quietly. Catherine put her phone away. "That's up to you and Tommy. But I'd suggest waiting until after the immediate legal crisis is handled. Right now, you need to focus on protecting yourself from the investigation." I watched Lucas sitting at his laptop late that first night, the screen glow making his face look tired and sad. He's scrolling through what must be Tommy's social media, clicking through photos one after another without saying anything. I bring him tea, but he doesn't notice. Just keeps staring at pictures of this brother he never knew existed. The next morning, I wake up and find him still there, surrounded by printed pages he got from public record sites. Birth certificates, school records, addresses. He's built this whole file on Tommy like he's trying to make up for 23 years in one night. I ask if he wants breakfast, but he just shakes his head and keeps reading. Over the next few days, it gets worse. Lucas comes home from work and goes straight to his laptop, pulling up Tommy's research presentations from MIT, his graduation photos, pictures of him at conferences. I catch Lucas staring at one photo for almost 10 minutes. Tommy in a cap and gown with Sandra beside him smiling. Richard must have been there too, taking the picture maybe, living this whole other life. Lucas traces Tommy's face on the screen with his finger, and I see how much it hurts him. One night I find him crying quietly in the dark, looking at a photo of Tommy hiking somewhere out west, and when I put my hand on his shoulder, he just says, he should have had that, should have grown up with a brother. I suggest maybe he could reach out, send Tommy a message, but Lucas closes the laptop and tells me Tommy probably hates him. Why would Tommy want anything to do with the legitimate son who got everything while he got kept secret? I try to explain that's not how it works, but Lucas isn't listening. He says Richard treated both families like garbage in different ways, and Tommy probably blames him for existing. My phone rings while I'm getting ready for my shift at the diner. Unknown number, but I answer anyway, and a man's voice asks if this is Anna. He introduces himself as Ricardo Vega, says Catherine gave him my information. His voice is calm and professional, the kind that makes you feel like things might actually be okay. He explains he's an attorney, and Catherine thought I might need legal help given everything happening with Richard. I tell him I'm not under investigation or anything, and he says that's exactly why we should talk now, before things get more complicated. He asks if I can come to his office tomorrow afternoon. I agree, even though I don't really understand why I need a lawyer. Ricardo explains that my closeness to the situation means I need protection, that being Richard's daughter-in-law puts me in a weird position with the FBI. He mentions he's doing this pro bono, that Catherine is paying his firm a big retainer for other stuff, and this is part of that arrangement. Something about how he says it makes me feel less like charity and more like I'm actually being taken care of. He specializes in protecting family members caught up in white-collar crime cases, people who didn't do anything wrong but are close enough to get hurt anyway. By the time we hang up, I feel like I can breathe a little easier. At least someone knows what they're doing, because I definitely don't. Ricardo's office is in a tall building downtown, all glass and steel. The receptionist is nice and offers me coffee while I wait. Ricardo comes out to get me himself instead of sending an assistant. He's maybe 50, gray hair, kind eyes behind glasses. His office has lots of books and a window overlooking the city. He shakes my hand and tells me to sit anywhere I'm comfortable. Then he starts asking questions about Richard, about the blackmail attempt, about what exactly happened in that office. I pull out the fake photos Richard tried to use against me, the ones Catherine let me keep as evidence. Ricardo's whole face changes when he sees them. His jaw gets tight and he studies each photo carefully, making notes on a legal pad. He explains this is actually really good for establishing Richard's pattern of criminal behavior. Not good that it happened to me, but good that we have proof of it. The fake photos show Richard was willing to make up evidence and lie to get what he wanted. Ricardo says this helps prove something called consciousness of guilt, that Richard knew he was doing wrong things and was trying to cover them up. He asks detailed questions about the hotel, whether I was ever actually there, what Richard said exactly. I tell him everything I can remember. Ricardo writes it all down and then looks at me seriously. He says we need to turn these photos over to the FBI, that Richard trying to force me to leave Lucas could mean more criminal charges. Blackmail, coercion, maybe other things. I feel sick thinking about it, but Ricardo's calm voice makes it seem manageable. He says he'll handle giving the photos to the investigators, and he'll be with me for any interviews they want to do. Lucas meets with his own attorney the next day. I offer to go with him, but he says it's something he needs to do alone. He's gone for 3 hours, and when he comes home, he looks like someone punched him in the stomach. He sits on our couch and stares at the wall for a long time before he can talk. Finally, he tells me his lawyer said he might have to testify against Richard if this goes to trial. The words come out flat, like he's still processing what they mean. His lawyer explained that Lucas's position in the family company makes him a person of interest. Not a suspect, but someone the investigators need to talk to. Even though there's no evidence Lucas knew about the embezzling, they have to check. They have to make sure he wasn't involved or didn't help cover things up. Lucas tells me his lawyer asked if he ever noticed anything weird with the company finances. If Richard ever acted strange about money, or kept Lucas away from certain accounts, Lucas had to admit he never saw the real financial systems. Richard always said Lucas needed more training first, needed to understand the business better before handling money stuff. Now Lucas realizes his father was keeping him away from evidence on purpose. He feels stupid for not questioning it. His lawyer told him to be completely honest with investigators and to stay as far from Richard as possible going forward. No contact, no conversations, nothing that could look like Lucas is helping his father. Lucas keeps saying he can't believe this is real, that he might have to sit in court and talk about his own father's crimes. I hold his hand and don't know what to say, because there's nothing that makes this better. When my phone rings a few days later and the caller ID says FBI, my stomach drops. A woman's voice introduces herself as Special Agent Meredith Blackwell. She sounds professional but not mean, if that makes sense. She says she needs to schedule interviews with both me and Lucas about Richard's case. I try to keep my voice steady, but I'm sure she can hear how nervous I am. I tell her I've never talked to the FBI before, and I don't really know what to expect. Meredith's voice gets a little softer. She explains this is routine in financial crime cases. We're not targets of the investigation, just witnesses who can help establish a timeline and Richard's behavior patterns. She needs to understand what we knew and when we knew it. The interview is set for next week at the Federal Building downtown. She gives me the address and tells me to bring Ricardo if I want, that having my attorney present is completely fine. After we hang up, I realize my hands are shaking. I call Lucas at work to tell him and he's quiet for a long time. Then he asks if I'm okay, and I lie and say yes. The truth is, I spend the next week barely able to eat. Every time I think about sitting in some FBI office answering questions, my chest gets tight. I keep worrying I'll say something wrong or forget something important. Ricardo calls to check on me and I admit I'm scared. He reminds me I didn't do anything wrong and that telling the truth is all I need to do. But knowing that doesn't stop the fear. My phone rings again 2 days before the FBI interview. Different number this time. A man's voice, smooth and friendly, asks if this is Anna. When I say yes, he introduces himself as Lawrence Hammond, Richard's attorney. My whole body tenses up. He uses this warm tone like we're old friends, asking how I'm holding up with everything that's happening. Says he knows this must be hard on me and Lucas. Then he starts asking questions about what I plan to tell the investigators, what my relationship with Richard was like, what I know about the family finances. His friendly voice makes my skin crawl because I can tell what he's really doing. He's trying to figure out what I'm going to say so Richard's legal team can prepare. I interrupt him and say I have my own attorney. Hammond pauses and then tries again, saying he's just trying to help the family get through this difficult time. I tell him not to call me again and hang up. My hands are shaking as I immediately call Ricardo. He answers on the second ring and I tell him what just happened. Ricardo's voice goes hard in a way I haven't heard before. He says Hammond is fishing for information, and that I should never speak to him directly under any circumstances. If Hammond calls again, I need to hang up immediately and tell Ricardo. He says he's going to file a formal complaint about the contact, that defense attorneys aren't supposed to talk to witnesses who have their own lawyers. Hammond backs off after that, no more calls. But the whole thing shows how worried Richard's legal team is about what I might say. It makes me feel like I have some kind of power in this situation, even though I never wanted it. The FBI interview is in a gray building downtown with security at the entrance. Ricardo meets me in the lobby and we go through metal detectors together. Meredith Blackwell comes out to get us herself. She's maybe 40, dark hair pulled back, wearing a suit but no tie. Her office is small and plain with just a desk and some chairs. She offers us water and I take it even though I'm not thirsty, just need something to do with my hands. Meredith starts with easy questions. How long have I known Richard? What's our relationship like? Do I work for the family company? I answer honestly, telling her about the 3 years I've been married to Lucas, about working at the diner, about how Richard always looked down on me for not being from money. Then she asks about the blackmail attempt. I tell her everything, walking through that day in Richard's office step by step. Meredith listens carefully and takes notes. When I show her the fake photos Ricardo and I brought, she studies them for a long time. She asks detailed questions about what Richard said exactly, what he threatened, how he tried to force me to leave Lucas. I watch her write things down about Richard's willingness to make up evidence and threaten family members. She thanks me for my cooperation when we're done. Says my testimony about the blackmail will be valuable in establishing something she calls consciousness of guilt and pattern of deception. Basically, it proves Richard knew he was doing wrong things and was trying to cover them up by hurting people. The whole interview takes about 90 minutes. When we leave, I feel drained but also relieved. It wasn't as scary as I thought it would be. Meredith treated me like a person, not like I was in trouble. Lucas's interview is the next day and I can tell he's dreading it. He barely sleeps the night before. In the morning, he puts on his best suit like he's going to court instead of just an interview. I offer to wait for him, but he says Ricardo will be there and he'll be fine. He's gone for almost 4 hours. When he finally comes home, he looks defeated in a way I've never seen. He doesn't even take off his jacket, just sits down at the kitchen table and puts his head in his hands. I wait for him to talk. Eventually, he tells me they asked about his role in the company, whether he ever noticed anything weird with the accounting or his father's behavior. Lucas had to admit he was groomed to take over the business, but Richard never gave him real access to the financial systems. He always said Lucas wasn't ready yet, needed more experience first. Now Lucas knows his father was keeping him away from evidence. He feels stupid and naive for not questioning it. The investigators asked if Richard ever acted strange about money, if he ever saw large transfers or unusual expenses. Lucas couldn't remember anything specific because he was never allowed to see those records. He tells me the worst part was realizing how his father played him. Richard made Lucas think he was prepared for leadership while actually keeping him in the dark. Used him as a prop to look like a legitimate family business while stealing from it. On the drive home, Lucas said something that breaks my heart. He tells me he's starting to wonder if his father ever actually loved him, or just saw him as another piece of the empire. Another thing to control and use. I don't know what to say to that because I'm wondering the same thing. Catherine calls 3 days after our FBI interviews. Her voice sounds tired but determined. She has news. Richard has been formally charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and money laundering. The bail is set at $5 million. She says it like she's reading from a list, matter of fact. Richard posted bail immediately, used money from somewhere to get out. Catherine's moved out of the family estate into a downtown apartment. She changed all her passwords and bank accounts, moved money around with the kind of efficiency that shows she's been planning this for months. Everything was ready to go, she just needed the right moment. She asks if Lucas and I want to stay at her new place. Says Richard knows where we live and she's worried about what he might do now that he's been charged. Lucas takes the phone from me and tells his mother we're not hiding from his father, that we didn't do anything wrong and we're not going to act like we did. Catherine tries to argue, but Lucas is firm. After he hangs up, I ask if he's sure about this, if maybe staying somewhere else for a while would be smart. Lucas says he's tired of his father controlling everything. If we start hiding now, we'll never stop. That night, I'm almost asleep when the apartment buzzer rings. The sound is loud and jarring in the dark. Lucas gets up to check the camera by our door. I hear him swear under his breath. He comes back to the bedroom and tells me it's Richard. My heart starts pounding. Lucas goes back to the intercom but doesn't press the button to let him in. Richard's voice comes through anyway, yelling from outside, demanding to be let in. saying he needs to talk to his son. Lucas stands there watching the camera screen while his father rants about betrayal and family loyalty. Richard's voice is slurred, words running together. He's clearly been drinking. He keeps pressing the buzzer over and over, the sound echoing through our apartment, yelling about how Lucas turned his back on family, how I poisoned his son against him. Other residents in the building start complaining through their own intercoms. Finally, building security shows up on the camera. 2 guards trying to talk Richard into leaving. He argues with them, but eventually they escort him away. Lucas and I stand in our dark apartment listening to the silence after. Neither of us can go back to sleep. Around 3 in the morning, Lucas finally says we should stay somewhere else temporarily, just until things calm down. I agree, even though I hate that Richard is forcing us out of our own home. We pack bags in the dark and leave before sunrise. Drive to a hotel on the other side of the city where Richard won't think to look for us. Check in under my maiden name just to be safe. The room is generic and impersonal, but at least it's somewhere Richard can't find us. At least for now, we can breathe. We check into a hotel on the other side of the city. The woman at the front desk doesn't recognize Lucas, which feels like a small victory. Our room is on the 4th floor with a view of the parking lot. Lucas sits on the edge of the bed and stares at his hands. I unpack our bags even though we'll probably only stay a few days. He doesn't move. I sit next to him and wait. The silence stretches out. Finally, he starts crying. Really crying. Not the quiet tears from before. His whole body shakes. He's making sounds I've never heard from him. Raw and broken. I put my arms around him and he grabs onto me like I'm the only thing keeping him from falling apart. He cries about his father, about the lies, about Tommy. He says his whole childhood was fake. Everything he thought was true turned out to be a performance. I hold him tighter. There's nothing I can say that will fix this. He cries until he can't anymore. Until he's just breathing hard against my shoulder. When he pulls back, his face is red and wet. He tells me I'm the only real thing left in his life. That he's grateful I'm here. We lie down still dressed and I keep holding him. Eventually, we both fall asleep. 3 days later, Lucas's phone rings while we're eating breakfast in the hotel room. He doesn't recognize the number but answers anyway. I watch his face change as he listens. He mouths the name Sandra at me. His half-brother's mother. The woman from the speakerphone call. She's asking if they can talk about Tommy and everything that happened. Lucas looks panicked, but he agrees to meet her for coffee. She suggests Boston since that's where she lives. After he hangs up, he asks if I'll come with him. I say yes immediately. The drive takes 3 hours. Lucas spends most of it practicing what he wants to say. He starts sentences and then stops. Tries different versions of the same thoughts. I can see him working through how to talk to the woman his father kept secret for over 20 years. He asks what I think he should say, and I tell him to just be honest. That seems to calm him down a little. We find the coffee shop she suggested near Boston Common. Park 2 blocks away and walk. Lucas keeps checking his watch even though we're early. Sandra is already there when we arrive. She's sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug. She looks tired in a way that goes deeper than just lack of sleep. Her clothes are neat but worn. Her hair is pulled back. She's probably in her late 40s but could pass for older. When she sees Lucas, she stands up. For a second, they just look at each other. Then she holds out her hand and he shakes it. We sit down. I order coffee I don't want just to have something to do with my hands. Sandra starts talking first. She explains that Richard told her he was divorced when they met, that he said his ex-wife was difficult and kept his son away from him. By the time Sandra learned the truth about Catherine still being married, she was already pregnant with Tommy. Richard convinced her this arrangement was best for everyone, that he'd take care of them financially, but couldn't acknowledge Tommy publicly because it would hurt his business and his other son. Sandra says she accepted it because she wanted Tommy to have opportunities. A good school, college paid for, a stable home. She never pushed Richard to leave his family, never demanded he tell Lucas about Tommy. She just took his money and kept quiet. Lucas asks about the accident. Sandra's face softens a little. She says Tommy was riding his bike home from campus when a car ran a red light and hit him. He has a broken leg that required surgery. Pins and screws holding the bone together. Also a concussion that had them worried for a while, but he's recovering well now. He knows about the FBI investigation because agents came to the hospital asking questions. He knows about Lucas too. Sandra showed him photos from Catherine's private investigator. Tommy is angry at Richard but curious about his half-brother. Sandra pulls out her phone and scrolls through photos. Birthday parties, school events, Tommy's high school graduation. In every photo, Richard is there smiling like a normal father. Lucas stares at the screen. I watch his face as he sees his father living this whole other life. Attending events, celebrating milestones, being present for a son he never told Lucas about. The photos show Tommy growing up looking more and more like Lucas. Same jawline, same eyes, same way of standing. Sandra keeps scrolling. Tommy playing soccer. Tommy at his college acceptance party. Tommy presenting research at some academic conference. Richard attended all of it in secret. Then Sandra does something unexpected. She turns to me specifically and apologizes. She says she never knew about Richard trying to blackmail me, but it doesn't shock her. That's how Richard operates, she explains. He controlled everything through money, made her dependent on his payments while keeping her completely separate from his real life. She couldn't make decisions without worrying about whether he'd cut off the money. Couldn't date anyone seriously because how do you explain your situation? Couldn't tell Tommy the full truth about his father until Tommy was old enough to understand complicated things. She's testified to the FBI about all the payments, where the money came from, how Richard structured it, everything. She says she's tired of protecting someone who never actually protected her or Tommy, just paid them to stay quiet and stay away. The drive home is quiet for a long time. Lucas doesn't practice speeches this time. He just stares out the window watching the highway pass. We're almost back to the city when he finally speaks. He says he wants to meet Tommy once he's recovered, if Tommy is willing. He can't control what Richard did, but he can choose whether to have a relationship with his brother. He doesn't want to lose that chance because of their father's mistakes. I tell him I think that's brave, that I'll support whatever he decides. He reaches over and takes my hand, holds it the rest of the way home. Back at the hotel, we get a call from Ricardo asking us to come to his office. Catherine's divorce attorney Evangeline wants to meet with all of us. We drive over that afternoon. Ricardo's office is downtown in a building that smells like old wood and coffee. Evangeline is already there when we arrive. She's younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense way of talking. She shakes our hands and gets right to it. The prosecution is building toward a plea deal rather than trial. Richard's attorney knows they have enough evidence to convict, so they're trying to negotiate the best terms possible. Ricardo explains that the blackmail evidence helps their case significantly. It shows Richard has a criminal mindset beyond just financial crimes, that he's willing to fabricate evidence and threaten people to get what he wants. Evangeline adds that Catherine's cooperation with investigators has positioned her well for the divorce, but the process will still take months to finish. There are assets to divide, accounts to audit, property to evaluate. Evangeline lays out Catherine's strategy. She's pursuing a fault-based divorce citing adultery and financial misconduct in our state that allows her to seek a larger share of marital assets. Richard's attorney is fighting it hard because it would leave Richard with significantly less money to pay legal fees and restitution. The divorce has become another battleground. Richard is trying to preserve his wealth while Catherine systematically takes apart his financial position. Every account Catherine finds gets frozen. Every asset gets evaluated. Every lie gets documented. Evangeline seems to enjoy the fight. She talks about depositions and discovery like she's planning a military campaign. Ricardo is more measured, but I can tell he thinks Catherine's approach is smart. Hit Richard from every direction at once. Make it impossible for him to hide anything. 2 days later, a letter arrives addressed to Lucas. It's from Richard's attorney asking Lucas to sign an affidavit supporting his father's character for sentencing purposes. Lucas reads it 3 times. He doesn't eat dinner. He paces around the hotel room. He asks what I think, and I tell him he needs to do what feels right for him, not what anyone else expects. He spends the next 2 days going back and forth. He writes drafts of responses and throws them away. Finally, he sits down and writes a simple letter declining to provide the affidavit. He says he can't lie about his father's character just because they're related. His hands shake when he seals the envelope. We walk to the post office together and he drops it in the mail slot. He stands there staring at the slot for a minute after. Then he turns and walks back to the car. Richard shows up at Lucas's office at the family company 3 days later. Lucas went in to handle some final paperwork before officially resigning. I'm at the hotel when he calls me. His voice is shaking. He says his father just cornered him in his office, tried to convince him to take over the business and protect the family legacy. Lucas told him he's resigning effective immediately, that he wants nothing to do with an empire built on lies and stolen money. Richard got angry, started yelling about birthright and loyalty and how everyone cuts corners in business. Lucas walked out while his father was still shouting. Security had to escort Richard from the building. Lucas is in his car in the parking garage. He says he's coming back to the hotel. I tell him to drive carefully. When he gets back, he looks exhausted but also relieved. He says it felt good to finally say no to his father, to choose his own path instead of the one Richard planned for him. We order room service and eat on the bed watching bad television. For the first time in weeks, Lucas actually laughs at something on the screen. It's a small thing, but it feels important. The next morning, my phone starts buzzing before I'm even fully awake. Unknown numbers. 3 calls back to back. I let them go to voicemail and check the messages. 2 reporters asking for comment about Richard. 1 person I went to high school with who I haven't talked to in 5 years wanting to know if the news story is about my husband's family. I delete them all and turn off my phone. Lucas is already up, standing by the hotel room window looking down at the street. He doesn't turn around when I get out of bed. I walk over and put my hand on his shoulder and he flinches slightly like he forgot I was there. His phone is on the windowsill and the screen keeps lighting up with notifications. He's turned off the sound, but the messages keep coming. Someone filmed Richard yelling at him in the office lobby. The video is grainy and the audio is bad, but you can clearly hear Richard shouting about betrayal and family loyalty. It's been shared on local news sites and social media. The comments are brutal. People calling Richard a thief and a hypocrite. People saying Lucas should have defended his father. People speculating about what else the family is hiding. I pick up Lucas's phone and see he has 43 unread messages. Some from relatives, some from former friends, some from reporters. I set it back down and suggest we both keep our phones off for the day. Lucas nods but doesn't move from the window. He's watching people walk past on the sidewalk below like he's waiting for someone to recognize him. Ricardo calls the hotel room directly around noon. The front desk patches him through and I answer because Lucas won't. Ricardo says the video is making things more complicated because it shows Richard's state of mind and his willingness to confront Lucas publicly. He says we need to maintain complete silence. No statements, no social media, no responses to anyone who reaches out. Let Richard's attorney deal with the public relations disaster. Our job is to stay out of it. I ask how long we need to hide and Ricardo pauses before saying he doesn't know. The case is moving faster than expected because of the video and the media attention. The prosecutor is using public pressure to push for a quick resolution. Richard's attorney is scrambling to control the narrative. Everything is happening at once and we just need to wait it out. Lucas spends the rest of the day in the hotel room. He orders room service but barely eats. He turns on the television and immediately turns it off when he sees a news segment about his father. He tries to read but I watch him stare at the same page for 20 minutes. I suggest going for a walk and he says he can't risk being recognized. I suggest watching a movie and he says he can't focus. By evening, he's just lying on the bed staring at the ceiling. Catherine calls my cell the next morning. Her voice is tight and controlled in a way that means she's angry. She says Richard's attorney contacted her with a new strategy. Hammond is planning to argue that Catherine knew about the affair and the payments to Sandra for years, that she only reported the crimes when she decided she wanted a divorce, that her cooperation with the FBI is revenge, not justice. I ask if that could actually work and Catherine says it's possible. Hammond is good at creating doubt. If he can make Catherine look vindictive, then Richard looks like a victim of a bitter wife. The embezzlement charges are still solid, but the narrative changes. Instead of a criminal caught by his wife's investigation, he becomes a husband destroyed by a woman's revenge. Catherine says she has documentation proving she didn't know about the embezzlement until recently. Bank records showing when she first contacted the private investigator. Emails showing her shock when she learned about the financial crimes. But Hammond will argue she's had months to create that paper trail. He'll say she planned this carefully to maximize damage to Richard. I ask what we should do, and Catherine says nothing. Let Hammond spin his story. Let the prosecutor counter it with evidence. Our job is to stay consistent. Tell the truth when asked. Don't engage with the media. Don't give Hammond anything he can twist. She sounds tired when she says this, like she's already fought this battle in her head 100 times. Lucas takes the phone and talks to his mother for a few minutes. I can only hear his side, but he's asking about her safety and whether Richard has tried to contact her. He nods a lot and says okay, and tells her to be careful. When he hangs up, he looks even more stressed than before. 2 weeks after the video goes public, I decide I need to go back to work. We can't hide in the hotel forever, and I can't keep taking unpaid time off. My boss has been understanding, but the diner needs staff and I need the money. Lucas tries to convince me to wait, but I tell him I have to face this eventually. The morning shift starts at 6. I arrive early and change into my uniform in the back. My coworkers are setting up for the breakfast rush, and they all stop talking when I walk into the kitchen. The silence lasts maybe 5 seconds before everyone starts working again. But I felt it. They've been discussing me. Discussing Richard. Discussing the whole situation. The first few hours are fine because we're too busy for conversation. I take orders and deliver food and refill coffee and nobody asks questions. But during the mid-morning lull, one of the regular customers asks if I'm the Anna from the news. I say I don't want to talk about it and walk away. He leaves a $1 tip on a $15 check. By lunch, more customers are staring, whispering to each other. A woman at table 6 asks her friend if I'm the one married to the embezzler's son. I pretend not to hear and take their order. They leave without tipping at all. My boss pulls me aside around 2. She's a nice woman in her 50s who's owned the diner for 20 years. She says she's sorry about everything I'm going through. She says she wants to support me. But she also says several customers have complained. Not about my work. About my presence. They don't want to be served by someone connected to the Richard scandal. It's not fair, but it's affecting business. She suggests I take a leave of absence. Just until things calm down. She'll hold my position. She'll give me a good reference. But right now, my being here is causing problems. She looks genuinely upset when she says this. Like she hates having to ask. I tell her I understand and finish my shift. I collect my tips, which are about half what I'd normally make. I change out of my uniform and walk to my car. I sit in the driver's seat for 10 minutes before I start crying. Not because I lost the job, because Richard's crimes are reaching into every part of my life. I never asked to be part of his family. I never asked for any of this, but I'm paying for it anyway. Lucas is sitting at the desk in the hotel room when I get back. He has his laptop open and papers spread everywhere. I ask what he's doing and he says he's applying for jobs. Real jobs. Not positions at the family company or businesses owned by his father's friends. Jobs where his last name doesn't matter. He shows me his resume. He's removed all references to the family business. He's emphasizing his education and his skills. He's applying to consulting firms and financial analysis positions. Places that will judge him on his credentials, not his connections. I watch him work for the next several days. He spends hours researching companies and customizing cover letters. He practices interview questions out loud. He reaches out to former professors who might give him references based on his academic work rather than his family. He's more focused than I've seen him in weeks, like he's finally found something he can control. One night while he's editing his resume, I realize what's happening. He's building a new identity. Not Richard's son, not heir to a fortune, just Lucas. Someone who earns his own way. Someone who succeeds or fails based on his own abilities. It's the first time since this started that he seems like he has a plan. Lucas's phone rings on a Thursday afternoon. Unknown Boston number. He almost doesn't answer, but something makes him pick up. I watch his face change as he listens. He says hello and then just listens for a long time. His expression shifts from confusion to surprise to something softer. When he hangs up, he tells me it was Tommy, Richard's other son, his half-brother. Tommy called him directly. They talked for almost an hour. Tommy said he's angry at Richard. Furious, actually. But he doesn't blame Lucas for any of this. He said he grew up knowing his father had another family. Richard told him stories about Lucas's mother being cold and controlling, about how Richard wanted to bring both families together but Catherine wouldn't allow it. Tommy believed those stories his whole life. Now he knows Richard lied. To everyone. Catherine wasn't the villain. Richard was just a man living two lives and lying to both families about the other. Tommy said he felt stupid for believing Richard's version for so long. Lucas tells me Tommy sounded genuine, not angry at him, actually interested in getting to know him. They talked about their lives, their interests. Tommy is studying engineering. He likes hiking and building things. He asked about Lucas's work and what he wants to do now that he's leaving the family business. They agreed to meet in person once Tommy is off crutches, sometime in the next few weeks, somewhere neutral where they can just talk. Lucas looks nervous but also excited when he tells me this. He says he always wanted a sibling growing up, someone who understood what it was like to be Richard's son. Now he has one, just not in the way he ever imagined. Catherine's office number showed up on my phone 3 days later. She asked if I had time to meet someone she thought could help me work through everything that happened. The therapist's name was Yvonne Randolph, and she had an opening that same week. Yvonne's office was in a quiet building downtown with plants in every corner and soft lighting that made the space feel safe. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes and a way of sitting that made you feel like she had all the time in the world. I spent the first session just telling her everything. The blackmail attempt, the fake photos, Richard calling me trash, how his words kept playing in my head even though I knew he was a criminal and a liar. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she asked me what I thought Richard was really trying to accomplish with the blackmail. I said he wanted me gone, so Lucas could marry someone from their social class. She nodded and then asked why Richard needed to control who Lucas married. I hadn't thought about it that way before. She explained that people who try to control others are usually dealing with their own fears and insecurities. Richard's attack on me wasn't really about my background. It was about his need to control Lucas and his terror of losing that control. Over the next few weeks, I saw Yvonne twice a week and slowly started to understand that Richard's cruelty said nothing about my worth. He would have found a reason to reject anyone Lucas chose because the real issue was his need for power over his son. Knowing that didn't make his words hurt less, but it helped me stop believing them. I started to see myself the way Lucas saw me. Someone strong enough to stand up to a man like Richard. Someone worth fighting for. The family function happened on a Saturday in late spring. Catherine insisted we attend even though Lucas wanted to skip it. She said hiding would make us look guilty and we had nothing to be ashamed of. Richard's sister hosted at her house in the suburbs, a massive place with a pool and gardens that probably cost more than most people make in a lifetime. We arrived late hoping to avoid too much attention, but Richard's sister spotted us immediately. Her name was Jane and she had the same cold eyes as her brother. She was talking to a group of women near the bar when we walked in and her voice got louder as we passed. She said something about family loyalty and how some people abandon their own blood when things get difficult. One of the other women laughed and said something about outsiders causing problems. Lucas heard it. I watched his jaw tighten and his hands curl into fists. He walked straight over to Jane while I followed a few steps behind. He asked her very calmly if she had something to say to him directly. Jane smiled in that fake way rich people do when they're being cruel and said she was just noting how sad it was when children turn on their parents. Lucas told her his father was a criminal who tried to blackmail his wife and embezzled millions of dollars. Jane said everyone makes mistakes and family should stick together. That's when Lucas raised his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. He said if she wanted to support a criminal, that was her choice, but she would not insult me. He said his father was a liar and a cheat who destroyed lives, and if she couldn't see that, then she was as morally bankrupt as Richard. Jane's face went red and several people gasped. Lucas took my hand and we walked out while people whispered and stared. In the car, Lucas was shaking. He apologized for losing his temper, but I told him I was proud of him for standing up for us. He said he was tired of people acting like his father was the victim. Tired of fake sympathy from people who only cared about protecting their social circle. We drove home in silence, and I could feel him processing the reality that his entire extended family had chosen Richard's side. The social fallout was worse than I expected. Over the next 2 weeks, people Lucas had known his entire life stopped returning his calls. Business contacts who used to invite him to lunch suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Catherine told us that several couples she and Richard socialized with for decades had cut off contact with her too. They were closing ranks to protect one of their own, even though everyone knew what Richard had done. I watched Lucas check his phone less and less as he realized no one was reaching out. Some days he seemed fine with it. He'd say those relationships were based on money and status anyway, and good riddance. Other days I'd find him staring out the window looking lost, and I knew he was mourning the loss of his entire social world. We'd talk about building new connections based on honesty instead of wealth, but I could see the grief in his eyes. One night he told me he felt like he was losing his identity. Everything he thought he knew about himself was tied to being Richard's son and part of that social circle. Now he had to figure out who he was without any of that. I held his hand and told him I was watching him become someone better, someone who chose what was right over what was easy. He cried a little and said he hoped I was right. The day Tommy and Lucas planned to meet, I stayed home even though Lucas invited me. I told him this was something he needed to do with his brother alone. He left around 11 for a restaurant halfway between our place and where Tommy was staying. I spent 3 hours cleaning the apartment and checking my phone every 10 minutes. I couldn't focus on anything else. When Lucas finally came home, he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen since before everything fell apart. He dropped his keys on the counter and pulled me into a hug and said, "Tommy was great." They talked for over 2 hours and barely mentioned Richard at all. Tommy was funny and easy to talk to, and they discovered they both loved hiking and terrible action movies. They made plans to meet again next week and maybe go on a hike together once Tommy was fully recovered. Lucas looked lighter somehow, like a weight had lifted off his shoulders. He told me Tommy didn't blame him for anything and actually seemed excited to have a brother. They exchanged numbers and Tommy texted him a movie recommendation before Lucas even got home. I watched my husband's face as he talked about his brother and realized this relationship might be one of the few good things to come from Richard's mess. A few days later, Lucas got a call from someone named Forrest Coleman. He was Richard's business partner and he wanted to meet with Lucas privately. Lucas called his attorney first and they agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown with the attorney present. I asked if he wanted me there, but he said it was probably boring business stuff. Lucas came back 2 hours later looking thoughtful. Forrest had explained that the company board was forcing Richard out permanently. They were restructuring everything and wanted new leadership with no connection to the scandal. Forrest offered Lucas a position on the advisory board. Not an executive role, but significant input on company decisions. He said Lucas wasn't his father and deserved a chance to contribute if he wanted to. Lucas spent the next several days thinking about the offer. He talked it through with me and his attorney and Catherine. Part of him wanted nothing to do with the company his father had corrupted. Another part saw it as a chance to help fix the damage Richard caused. He kept going back and forth, and I told him whatever he decided I would support. Finally, Lucas called Forrest back and accepted a limited role as an advisor. He would focus on ethical business practices and making sure nothing like Richard's crimes could happen again. But he had one condition. Part of his pay would go directly to a fund for people affected by the embezzlement. Forrest agreed immediately and said the board would match Lucas's contribution. When Lucas told me about the deal, I could see he felt good about it. Like he was taking something broken and trying to make it better. He wasn't doing it for the money or the family legacy. He was doing it because he wanted to help make things right, even though none of it was his fault. 2 weeks later, Richard called Lucas directly. The plea deal deadline was getting close, and Richard wanted to meet in person. He said he needed to explain himself before making his final decision. Lucas agonized over it for days. Part of him wanted nothing to do with his father. Another part needed to hear what Richard had to say. He finally agreed to meet at Hammond's office with the attorney present. I offered to come, but Lucas said this was something he had to do alone. He left around 2 in the afternoon, and I sat in our apartment trying not to imagine what they were saying to each other. I cleaned the kitchen twice and started dinner even though I had no appetite. Every time I heard a car outside, I looked out the window. Lucas came home 3 hours later looking completely drained. He sat on the couch and stared at nothing for a full minute before he could talk. He said Richard spent the entire meeting trying to justify everything, claiming he built the company so he deserved to use the money however he wanted, saying Sandra and Tommy needed his support, blaming Catherine for being cold, blaming the FBI for targeting him, never once actually apologizing. Lucas said he realized during the conversation that his father was completely incapable of taking responsibility. Richard genuinely believed he was the victim, that everyone had turned on him unfairly. Lucas told me he felt this strange sense of relief at finally seeing his father clearly. No more illusions about who Richard really was. Richard accepted the plea deal 2 days before the deadline expired. The news broke that same afternoon with details about the embezzlement and the 8-year sentence recommendation. Photos of Richard being led into court showed up on every local news site. Commentary about his fall from grace filled social media. Lucas stopped looking at his phone after the first hour. He focused instead on his upcoming start date at the consulting firm. He reviewed the materials they sent him and prepared for his first week. He told me he was choosing to look forward instead of dwelling on his father's public humiliation. I watched him deliberately turn away from the news coverage and felt proud of his strength. Catherine's divorce moved incredibly fast once Richard's plea was finalized. The criminal conviction made the fault-based divorce straightforward. Her attorney Evangeline negotiated a settlement that gave Catherine 70% of remaining marital assets after restitution was paid. She got the family estate and full control of her own trust fund that Richard had been managing for years. The first thing Catherine did was put the estate up for sale. She told Lucas she wanted nothing that reminded her of the life she built with Richard. She was moving into a smaller place downtown and starting completely fresh. Lucas helped her sort through decades of belongings, and I watched them work together with a new closeness they never had before. Lucas helped Catherine sort through decades of belongings from the estate, and I watched them work side by side with a closeness that felt new and real. They went through old photo albums and packed up dishes and decided what to keep and what to donate, and Catherine told stories about Lucas as a kid that made him laugh. She showed him his baby pictures and his school projects and all the things she'd saved over the years, and Lucas held each item carefully like he was seeing his childhood from a different angle. When they found Richard's things in the study, Catherine didn't hesitate. She packed everything into boxes for storage and said Lucas could decide later if he wanted any of it, but she was done keeping reminders of a man who never existed the way she thought he did. Lucas thanked her for giving him the choice instead of just throwing it all away, and Catherine hugged him tight and said she was trying to be the parent he deserved, even if she hadn't always been before. Tommy arrived on a Friday afternoon with a backpack and a smile that looked so much like Lucas's it was startling. He shook my hand and thanked me for having him, then looked around our small apartment and said it felt cozy and comfortable. Lucas showed him the guest room, and Tommy set down his bag, and within 10 minutes they were talking about sports and movies like they'd known each other for years instead of weeks. I made dinner while they sat at the kitchen counter and talked, and I watched them discover they both hated mushrooms and loved terrible action movies, and had the same weird habit of organizing their books by color. Tommy asked me about working at the diner and what it was like growing up in Newark, and he listened to my answers like he actually cared instead of just being polite. When I asked about his engineering program, he got excited and started explaining his research on renewable energy systems, and Lucas listened with genuine interest, even though half the technical stuff went over both our heads. We ate pasta and salad and garlic bread, and Tommy helped clear the table without being asked. He washed dishes while Lucas dried, and I put things away, and we worked together like we'd done this 100 times before. After dinner, we put on a movie. Some ridiculous thing with explosions and bad dialogue that we all made fun of while watching. Tommy sat on one end of the couch and Lucas on the other, and I was in the middle, and it felt easy and natural in a way I hadn't expected. During a particularly stupid scene, Tommy and Lucas both said the same sarcastic comment at the exact same time, then looked at each other and started laughing. I watched them laugh together and felt something warm in my chest, seeing Lucas find this piece of family he never knew he was missing. The next morning, Tommy made pancakes while Lucas and I were still waking up, and he had breakfast ready when we stumbled into the kitchen. We ate and talked about what to do with the day, and Tommy suggested we just hang out instead of trying to do tourist stuff. We walked to a nearby park and threw a frisbee around, and Lucas and Tommy got competitive about who could throw farther. They were both terrible at it, and the frisbee kept going wild, and I laughed watching them chase it across the grass. We got coffee from a food truck and sat on a bench, and Tommy told us about his girlfriend and how they met in a study group. He pulled out his phone and showed us pictures, and she looked nice and normal and happy. Lucas asked if it was serious, and Tommy said he thought so, that he could see a future with her. The way he said it was simple and honest, and I liked that he didn't try to act cool or uncertain about caring for someone. We walked back to the apartment and played video games, and I watched them get into it like kids. They argued about strategy and laughed when they lost and high-fived when they won, and I sat nearby reading a book and listening to them bond. That night we ordered pizza and watched another bad movie, and Tommy fell asleep on the couch halfway through. Lucas covered him with a blanket and we went to bed, and in the dark Lucas whispered that having Tommy here felt right. He said he didn't realize how much he'd wanted a sibling until now, and I held his hand and told him I was glad they found each other. Sunday morning, Tommy had to leave to get back to Boston for class the next day. He packed his bag and gave me a hug, thanking me for the weekend and saying he felt like part of the family. Lucas drove him to the train station and came back an hour later looking happy and sad at the same time. He told me Tommy said he wanted to do this again soon, maybe next month, and Lucas had agreed immediately. That night, Lucas was quieter than usual, and when I asked if he was okay, he said he was thinking about all the years he and Tommy missed, all the birthdays and holidays and regular days they could have spent together if Richard hadn't kept them separated. I reminded him they had now and the future, and Lucas nodded and said he was trying to focus on that instead of what was lost. Sandra called a few days later while we were making dinner. Lucas put her on speaker, and she thanked him for having Tommy visit, saying Tommy came home talking about how great the weekend was. She said she was relieved the brothers were building a relationship that had nothing to do with Richard, that they were choosing each other instead of being forced together by circumstances. Lucas told her Tommy was welcome anytime, and Sandra's voice got emotional when she thanked him. Then she mentioned she was writing a book about her experience as Richard's secret second family. She said she wanted to help other women who found themselves in similar situations, trapped by financial dependence and isolation and lies. She'd been working with a therapist and a writing coach, and she thought sharing her story might prevent other people from making the same mistakes she did. I told her I thought that was brave and important, and Sandra laughed and said it was terrifying but necessary. She said she was done hiding and being ashamed of something that wasn't her fault, and I heard strength in her voice that probably took years to build. Lucas asked when the book might be finished, and Sandra said maybe a year or two, that she was taking her time to get it right. I told her I wanted to read it when it was done, and Sandra said she'd make sure we got copies. After we hung up, Lucas said he admired Sandra for turning her pain into something that could help people, and I agreed. She could have stayed bitter and angry, but instead she was trying to create something positive from the wreckage Richard left behind. Lucas started his new job on a Monday morning in September. He left the apartment in a suit looking nervous and excited, and I kissed him goodbye and told him he'd be great. He came home that evening looking energized in a way I hadn't seen in months. He told me about his first day while we made dinner, describing his coworkers and the projects he'd be working on, and the office culture that felt completely different from his father's company. Nobody treated him like the boss's son, or asked about his family, or made assumptions about who he was. They cared about his work and his ideas, and that was it. Over the next few weeks, I watched him settle into the job with growing confidence. He worked longer hours than he ever did at the family company, sometimes not getting home until 7 or 8, but he seemed happy instead of drained. He talked about his colleagues by name and told me about problems they were solving together, and I could hear pride in his voice when he described his contributions. One night, he came home excited about a presentation he'd given that went well, and he said his boss complimented his analysis and asked him to take the lead on the next phase. He was succeeding based on his own abilities instead of his last name, and I could see him becoming more sure of himself. He made friends with some of his coworkers, and they started getting lunch together, and Lucas came home telling me about conversations about sports and movies and normal things that had nothing to do with family drama or money. I watched him build a professional identity separate from being Richard's son, and I saw him grow into someone who believed in his own worth. Richard's sentencing hearing arrived on a cold morning in October. Lucas decided not to attend, telling me over breakfast that he'd said everything he needed to say, and watching his father go to prison wouldn't bring him closure. I asked if he was sure, and he nodded, saying he wanted to focus on moving forward instead of dwelling on Richard's consequences. Catherine went to the hearing and planned to testify about the impact of Richard's betrayal on the family. Evangeline had prepared her statement and coached her on staying calm, and Catherine left the house that morning looking determined. Lucas went to work like it was a normal day, though I could tell he was distracted. I had the day off and spent it cleaning the apartment and trying not to think about what was happening in that courtroom. Catherine called that afternoon and asked if she could stop by, and I said yes. She arrived an hour later looking exhausted but relieved. She sat on our couch and told me about the hearing, how she'd testified about Richard's lies and betrayals, and the years she spent believing in a marriage that never really existed. She said it was hard but necessary, and the judge listened carefully to everything she said. Evangeline called Lucas at work to tell him the outcome, and he came home early. The judge had sentenced Richard to the full 8 years with the possibility of reduced time for good behavior. Richard would be in federal prison until Lucas was in his mid-30s, and suddenly it felt real in a way it hadn't before. Lucas sat down heavily on the couch next to his mother, and they were quiet for a long time. Catherine reached over and took his hand, and they sat there together processing what it meant that Richard was actually going to prison for almost a decade. In the weeks after sentencing, I noticed Lucas going through grief that didn't follow any pattern I recognized. Some mornings he woke up angry, talking about all the lies Richard told and the people he hurt. Other days he seemed sad, mourning the father he thought he had instead of the criminal Richard turned out to be. Some days he didn't talk about Richard at all, going through his routine like nothing had happened. I didn't know how to help him because his feelings changed so fast, and I worried I was saying the wrong things. We had a session with Yvonne scheduled for that Thursday, and I brought up my concern about Lucas's changing moods. Yvonne explained that what Lucas was experiencing was normal for ambiguous loss, grieving someone who's still alive but completely absent from your life. She said his feelings didn't have to make sense or follow any timeline, and it was okay for him to be angry one day, and sad the next, and numb the day after that. Lucas looked relieved when she said that, admitting he felt crazy for not knowing how he was supposed to feel. Yvonne worked with both of us on accepting that grief isn't linear, and Lucas's emotions about his father might stay complicated forever. She helped him see that he didn't owe anyone consistency in his feelings, not even himself. Over the next few sessions, we talked about how to handle the ambiguous loss of a living parent, and Yvonne gave us tools for managing the days when the grief felt overwhelming. Lucas started keeping a journal to track his feelings, and he said it helped to write down what he was experiencing instead of trying to make sense of it all in his head. Tommy called in early November and invited us to Boston for Thanksgiving with him and Sandra. Lucas was quiet after the call, and I asked what he was thinking. He said he was touched by the invitation, but worried it might be awkward, spending a holiday with his father's other family. I reminded him that Sandra and Tommy were victims of Richard's choices too, and they were offering us a place in their tradition because they wanted us there. Lucas agreed to go and called Tommy back to accept. We drove to Boston the day before Thanksgiving, and Tommy met us at Sandra's house. It was a small place in a quiet neighborhood. Nothing like the estate Lucas grew up in, but it felt warm and lived in. Sandra greeted us at the door and hugged Lucas, then hugged me and welcomed us inside. She'd been cooking all day, and the house smelled like turkey and pie, and she put us to work helping with preparations. Tommy and Lucas peeled potatoes while Sandra and I made stuffing, and we talked and laughed like we'd done this together for years. That night, we stayed up late playing board games, and Sandra told stories about Tommy growing up that made him groan with embarrassment. The next day, we cooked together and ate too much food and watched football, and it felt more like real family than most holidays Lucas spent with Richard's relatives. Sandra treated Lucas like a son instead of a reminder of Richard's betrayal, asking about his job and his life, and listening to his answers with genuine interest. I watched her choose grace over bitterness, including Lucas in her family despite everything Richard did to both of them. When we left on Friday, Sandra hugged us both and said we were always welcome, and I believed her. On the drive home, Lucas was quiet, and finally he said spending Thanksgiving with Sandra and Tommy felt more honest than any holiday with his father's family ever had. I understood what he meant because I felt it too. Catherine called me 3 months after Richard's sentencing with news that made my hands shake. She'd started a nonprofit foundation called the Women's Financial Independence Project, and she wanted me on the advisory board. I met her at a coffee shop downtown where she spread documents across the table showing budgets and program plans. The foundation would teach financial literacy to women from working-class backgrounds, helping them understand wealth and power dynamics so they wouldn't end up trapped like she had been. She looked at me with something close to nervousness and asked if I'd help guide the programs, since I understood both worlds now. I said yes without thinking about it, because the work felt important in a way nothing else had. Over the next few months, I attended board meetings and helped design workshops, and I found myself talking to women who reminded me of my younger self. Catherine and I spent hours planning curriculum and discussing how to reach women who needed help most. The work brought us closer in ways I never expected, building something that felt like a real mother-daughter relationship. She told me once that watching me stand up to Richard had shown her what courage looked like, and I realized we'd both been changed by that day in his office. Lucas came home one evening 6 weeks later with a bottle of champagne and a grin I hadn't seen in months. His boss had promoted him to senior analyst after less than a year, citing his work ethic and analytical skills rather than family connections. His colleagues threw him a celebration at the office, and he showed me photos on his phone of people laughing and toasting him. I looked at the pictures and saw Lucas surrounded by coworkers who knew him as Lucas the analyst, not Lucas whose father went to prison. That night, we sat on our apartment balcony drinking champagne, and he told me he finally felt like himself. He said he was building a life based on his own choices and values, not trying to live up to some impossible standard his father set. I watched him talk about his projects at work with genuine excitement and felt prouder of him than I'd ever been. He'd taken everything that happened and used it to become someone stronger and more honest. We closed on our new house in early spring and spent the next 2 months making it ours. The place was small compared to where Lucas grew up, but it had good bones and a big backyard. We painted the living room a warm yellow and spent weekends stripping old wallpaper and refinishing floors. Tommy and his fiancée drove down to help us move furniture, and Catherine showed up with housewarming gifts, including a set of dishes and a framed photo of all of us from Thanksgiving. The 4 of us planted tomatoes and herbs in the backyard, while Catherine gave advice about gardening she'd learned from her own mother. I stood in our kitchen that evening making dinner while everyone laughed in the next room and realized we were building something real and solid. The house was filled with honesty and love instead of performance and pretense. Lucas found me later washing dishes and wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I knew he felt it too. My boss at the diner pulled me aside one morning and offered me the shift manager position. I accepted and started taking business classes at community college 2 nights a week, thinking maybe I could open my own restaurant someday. Lucas helped me study for tests and quizzed me on accounting principles while we ate dinner. I realized Richard's attempt to make me feel small had actually made me more determined to prove my worth. Not to him, but to myself. Ricardo stopped by the diner one afternoon and we talked about my business plans over coffee. He offered to help with planning when I was ready to take that step, and I was grateful he'd become a friend beyond just being our attorney. The classes were hard and managing the diner was stressful, but I felt like I was building something that belonged to me. Our 4th wedding anniversary fell on a Saturday in June, and Lucas suggested we renew our vows. We planned a small ceremony in Catherine's garden with just Tommy, Sandra, Catherine, and a few close friends we'd made over the past year. I wore a simple white dress, and Lucas wore a suit he'd bought himself with his own money. The ceremony was honest and real, acknowledging we'd been tested in ways we never expected, but chose each other every single day. Lucas promised to build a life based on truth and respect, and I believed him because I'd watched him do exactly that. Catherine cried during the ceremony, and Sandra hugged us both afterward. We ate cake and drank wine and told stories until the sun went down. That night, Lucas and I lay in bed in our small house, and I felt more married to him than I had on our actual wedding day 4 years earlier. Tommy's wedding was beautiful in a way that made my chest tight. The ceremony was outdoors at a vineyard in Connecticut, and Lucas stood next to Tommy as his best man. Lucas's speech brought everyone to tears as he talked about finding a brother in the middle of chaos and learning that family is something you choose as much as something you're born into. He talked about Tommy's kindness and strength and how grateful he was to have him in his life. Sandra danced with both her sons during the reception, and Catherine joined them, the 4 of them forming a circle that somehow held all the joy and pain of their complicated history. I watched Lucas laughing with Tommy and saw how much he'd healed. His face was open and relaxed in a way it hadn't been since before everything fell apart. Later that night, Lucas and I slow danced, and he told me he finally understood what family was supposed to feel like. A year after Richard's sentencing, Lucas decided he was ready to visit his father in prison. I offered to go with him, but he said this was something he needed to do alone. I waited at home while he drove to the federal facility 3 hours away, trying to read but mostly just staring at the clock. He returned late that afternoon looking peaceful in a way I'd never seen before. We sat on the back porch and he told me he'd said everything he needed to say to Richard. He'd told his father he forgave him for his own sake, but they wouldn't have a relationship. That forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. Richard had tried to argue and justify and blame everyone else, and Lucas had just listened and then walked away. I held him while he cried tears that felt different from before, like he was finally letting go of something heavy he'd been carrying. He said he didn't feel angry anymore, just sad about what could have been if his father had been a different person. 2 years after everything fell apart in Richard's office, Lucas and I were genuinely happy in a life we built ourselves through honesty and hard work. We had Sunday dinners with Tommy and his wife where we cooked together and played board games. We called Catherine and Sandra regularly, and they'd become friends in their own right, sometimes meeting for lunch without us. Lucas loved his job, and I was taking the final classes I needed before applying for a small business loan. Our house was small but filled with laughter and plants and photos of the people we loved. Some days were still hard, and the scars from Richard's betrayal hadn't completely faded, but we'd learned that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing how to move forward every single day. We chose each other and the family we'd created from broken pieces, and that choice made us stronger than we'd ever been before. I looked at Lucas across the dinner table one Sunday with Tommy and his wife and Catherine all laughing about something, and I knew this was what happiness actually looked like. Not perfect or easy, but real and honest and worth fighting for.